The courthouse was nearly empty, just the click of heels on marble and the rustle of paper as the clerk handed over the final document. Liam Carter stood beside a woman he had spoken fewer than 10 words to, in a suit that didn't quite fit and shoes that pinched his toes. She hadn't even looked at him once since they entered the room. She didn't need to. She had already made her decision. Clara Devon signed her name with perfect control, her hand steady as if she were authorizing another $1 million deal. Her expression didn't change. Not when the judge cleared his throat, not when the legal assistant asked them to pose for the mandatory documentation photo, and certainly not when Liam said his first word of the day. "So, this is real, then." She turned to him slowly, her gaze swept over him in silence, cold and composed. For a second, Liam wondered if she would walk out without another word, but then she said evenly, "You dared." "I delivered. The rest is irrelevant." Liam had no idea what he expected from marrying a woman twice his age on a bet. Maybe scandal, maybe laughter, maybe even a story to tell at the bar. But what he got was silence. Unshakable, uncomfortable silence. It had started 3 nights ago in a cheap bar near the university. He was broke, behind on rent, one warning away from losing his scholarship. His best friend Josh had leaned in with a grin and a glass of whiskey and said, "I dare you to propose to the next rich woman who walks in. Bonus points if she says yes." Liam had laughed. He was 22, a literature student working 2 part-time jobs and eating instant noodles 5 nights a week. He had nothing to lose, which made him dangerous in the most reckless way. When Clara walked into that bar an hour later, in a dark green coat with silent heels and eyes that could cut through stone, she hadn't looked at anyone. She sat down alone, ordered tea, and read on her phone. She looked untouchable, which made her perfect. Liam approached her with a ridiculous line, something about how marriage is the last real rebellion, and would she care to join him in a protest ceremony? She didn't smile, she didn't laugh. She only said, "You're not drunk. Why are you doing this?" He hadn't expected her to engage, so he told the truth. Dare. No money, no life, no expectations. Just needed to prove he still existed in this city. Clara had stared at him for a long moment, then she finished her tea, reached into her bag, and handed him a card. "Meet me here tomorrow. Bring a suit. Don't be late." Now, here they were, married, legally, permanently, or at least until she said otherwise. As they stepped out of the courthouse, Clara finally spoke again. "You will stay in the guest wing. I don't need entertainment. I need obedience." 7 days. Then we part ways. Liam raised an eyebrow. 7 days? That's all I require to confirm this was a mistake. He wanted to say something clever, something smart, maybe even cutting, but instead, he just looked at her. "You don't seem like someone who makes mistakes." Clara paused mid-stride, her lips almost curled but not into a smile. More like a memory she hadn't asked to remember. "Neither do you." Yet here we are. They got into her black town car in silence. The driver didn't ask questions. The city passed by in streaks of gray and gold. Liam stared out the window, thinking he had just done the craziest thing in his life. What he didn't know was that he had just stepped into the quietest storm he would ever survive. And in 7 days, he would no longer care about the dare. He would only care about the woman who looked at him like he was the last person in the world she wanted to believe in. Liam Carter had never seen ceilings that high in his life. The Devon penthouse was less of an apartment and more of a glass fortress hovering above the city. The walls were lined with cold art. The kind that looked like emotion had been stripped out and replaced with price tags. Everything was white, silver, or some muted tone that made him feel like even breathing too loud might stain the air. The place was spotless, silent, and painfully beautiful, like Clara herself. She moved ahead of him without saying a word, heels clicking softly against the marble. She didn't turn to see if he followed. She just expected he would. A housekeeper greeted them near the hallway, bowed slightly, and took Liam's small duffel bag with one gloved hand. Clara gave her a short nod, then finally turned to Liam. "You'll sleep here. That door leads to the guest suite. The kitchen is downstairs, but you won't need it. Meals are scheduled. You'll be expected at breakfast. 8 sharp. No interruptions. No noise after midnight. No wandering." Liam blinked. "Am I a husband or a house cat?" Her brow arched slightly. "For 7 days, you are an arrangement. Nothing more. After that, nothing at all." He wanted to push back, to say something sarcastic, but her tone made it clear this wasn't a conversation. It was a set of rules. She didn't give space for reaction. Just like that, she disappeared into the master wing and left him standing in a hallway that smelled faintly of bergamot and distance. Liam took his time exploring the suite. It was twice the size of his entire college apartment. Soft linens, high-thread count sheets, a rainfall shower, and a view of Manhattan that felt almost fictional, but none of it felt like home. It felt like he had stepped into a curated museum of someone else's life. That night, he lay awake for hours, not from fear, not from discomfort, but from confusion. What kind of woman says yes to a marriage proposal from a stranger, then vanishes behind walls and schedules? What kind of pain does that take? What kind of loneliness? At the same time, in a darker wing of the penthouse, Clara stood barefoot in front of a floor-length mirror, removing her earrings one by one. Her hands moved with precision, but her thoughts were anything but. She'd meant to scare him off. That was the point. Let him feel the weight of silence. Let him understand this was no fairy tale. But instead, he made jokes, asked questions, looked at her with curiosity instead of calculation. Most men tried to impress her. Liam just existed. That was dangerous. She had built her world carefully, like armor. Liam didn't know how to play the game, which made him unpredictable, which made him real. Over the next few days, a quiet rhythm formed between them. Breakfast at 8, Clara in tailored suits, sipping black coffee and scrolling through economic reports. Liam in jeans, unshaven, trying not to say the wrong thing. He watched how she moved, how she spoke to staff, how she answered 3 emails in one breath without blinking. She was flawless, efficient, but cold, except when she looked out the window longer than necessary, or when she tapped her ring finger against her coffee cup without realizing it. Tiny moments of humanity slipping through the cracks. Clara watched him too, though she would never admit it. He lingered near the bookshelves in the upstairs library. He refilled her tea without being asked. Once, she caught him reading a collection of poetry she had hidden behind finance volumes. Pablo Neruda, not something people usually reached for in a billionaire's house. "What are you looking for in those words?" she asked one morning. He shrugged, not looking up. Something that feels more honest than what we say out loud. She didn't reply, but that night she moved the poetry books closer to the front. By day 5, the tension had changed shape. It was no longer about awkward silences or scheduled meals. It became about glances, the way his eyes lingered a second too long when she walked past, the way her voice softened when she said his name. Once, he caught her watching him sleep on the couch during a rainstorm, her expression unreadable. Not desire, not pity, something in between. It was on the 6th night that things shifted. A thunderstorm rolled across the city, darkening the sky and cutting the power for a brief moment. Clara was in the hallway when the lights went out. He found her standing still, hands slightly shaking, framed by flashes of lightning. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but her eyes betrayed something older than fear. "Just memories," she said. "I used to hate storms when I was a kid. I still do." He stepped closer, then let me stay. just until it passes." She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. They stood in silence, the kind that didn't feel empty, the kind that waited. The city beyond the glass trembled with rain, but inside, something else was falling too. The walls she had spent years building, and the boy who had nothing to lose, suddenly realizing he had already given her everything. Liam didn't remember falling asleep. One moment he was sitting beside her in the hallway as the rain blurred the skyline. The next he woke up to the faint aroma of her perfume lingering on his shirt. She wasn't there anymore, but a blanket had been draped over his shoulders, and a glass of water sat beside him on the floor. That tiny gesture, practical, quiet, almost hidden, hit harder than any kiss could have. She was letting him in, not with grand declarations, but with the kind of care that sneaks past your guard before you can name it. He tried not to read too much into it, tried to ignore how her gaze lingered a moment longer each morning, how she asked, without asking, if he had slept well. Their interactions were still clipped, still wrapped in silence, but it was no longer the cold, dismissive silence of strangers. It was something warmer, heavier, the kind of silence that asked questions without words. On the 6th night, the power had returned, but something between them had short-circuited. Neither of them acknowledged it. Clara returned to her usual routine, her face unreadable, her schedule tight, but Liam noticed the difference. She started leaving the door to her wing slightly ajar. She didn't tell him what to do anymore. She asked if he wanted dinner, not in a commanding tone, but softly, like she was offering more than food. He cooked for her that night, even though he had no business doing it in a penthouse kitchen worth more than his tuition. He made pasta, badly. She corrected his technique, rolling up her sleeves and showing him how to season without drowning the dish. They stood shoulder to shoulder, bumping elbows. He laughed when she made a face at the mess he left behind. She shook her head, but she didn't walk away. In fact, she poured him wine and leaned against the counter as he dried dishes with a towel that didn't belong in hands like his. "You could have told me to leave that first day," he said quietly. "Why didn't you?" Clara didn't answer right away. She swirled the wine in her glass and stared at it like it held an answer. "Because you didn't try to charm me," she finally said. "You didn't try to fix me. You just showed up. And for some reason, that mattered." That night, he didn't return to the guest suite. He sat with her in the library, both of them reading different books but glancing at each other every few pages. Around midnight, she set her book down. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "The dare?" he said. "No, I regret not seeing you clearly from the beginning." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Then she stood. "Come with me." She led him to the rooftop terrace. The rain had stopped, but the floor was still wet, glistening under the city lights. Clara kicked off her heels and walked barefoot across the tiles. Liam followed, slower. She didn't say anything. She just stared out at the skyline. "This city worships power," she murmured, "and I've spent my whole life becoming untouchable. But I'm tired, Liam. I'm tired of being glass, of people seeing only my money or my scars." He took a step closer. "I don't care about your money, and I don't see your scars." She turned to him. "Then what do you see?" He hesitated, then said, "Someone who never got to be held without a contract attached." She looked at him like that sentence had cracked something open. In the next breath, she kissed him. It wasn't a dramatic kiss. It wasn't hot or messy. It was soft, hesitant, almost shy, like she was asking for permission without knowing the words. Liam didn't push. He didn't pull her closer. He just stood there and let her lead. When she stepped back, her breathing was uneven. "I don't do this," she whispered. "Not since. I don't even know how to want this anymore." "You don't have to know," he replied. "You just have to let it happen." That night, They didn't undress each other. They undressed their stories. Liam sat cross-legged on the bed, telling her about the time his father left, about the way his mother cried when the bills piled up, about the dreams he buried because surviving was more urgent than dreaming. Clara told him about being 19 and marrying a man who made her feel loved until she made more money than him. She told him about the betrayal, about the headlines, about the way the world called her ruthless because she refused to cry in public. At some point, her head rested on his chest and his hand moved gently through her hair. "I feel like I'm breaking every rule I made for myself," she whispered. "Then let them break," he said. "Maybe the rules were wrong." It was nearly dawn when they finally fell asleep, not as a dare, not as an arrangement, but as two people holding each other like they had finally been seen. The next morning, everything was quieter, not awkward, not tense, just full, the way air feels before it rains. Clara moved through her morning routine with the same efficiency, but her eyes kept drifting toward him as if checking that he was still there. Liam didn't ask questions. He let the silence speak. But he noticed the way she paused longer at the coffee machine, the way her hand lingered on the counter after brushing his, like she didn't want to let go just yet. But the world doesn't wait for slow love. That afternoon, a call came through. Clara stepped into her office and didn't return for 2 hours. When she did, her face was pale. "Liam," she said, voice tight, "you need to go." He stood, stunned. "What happened?" "They found out about the marriage, the dare, everything. My board thinks I'm unstable. They're questioning my position." "I didn't say anything," he said quickly. "I swear." "I know," she replied, "but it doesn't matter. Perception is everything." "So you're cutting me off," he said, jaw tight. "I'm protecting what I built." "And what about what we built?" he asked. She didn't answer. He picked up his bag. "You always told me this was temporary. Maybe you were right." Clara didn't stop him. She didn't follow. She just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, watching the one person who had touched her where no one dared. Walk away. Liam hadn't cried in years. Not when he left home, not when his father vanished, not even when he was broke enough to consider dropping out. But now, sitting alone on a bench in Central Park with the cold wind biting at his face and her voice echoing in his head, he felt something heavy press into his chest, not sorrow, not anger, just the hollow thud of something unfinished. He stayed away for 3 days, no texts, no calls, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how to be the man who deserved her. The world she came from wasn't just a different tax bracket. It was a different reality, one built on contracts, legacy, and control. She had been willing to open that door, and he had walked through it only to be thrown back into the street. And still, he didn't regret it. Not 1 second. He would rather be heartbroken by something real than safe inside something fake. On the 4th day, Josh found him at their usual coffee spot, slumped over a lukewarm mug, eyes dark. "You look like hell," Josh said. Liam didn't answer. "I heard about the boardroom mess," Josh continued, lowering his voice. "They're calling her reckless, saying she compromised everything over some impulsive marriage to a college kid." Liam flinched. "She's not reckless. She's the most controlled person I've ever met. That's the problem." Josh leaned back. "Then why are you here and not there?" Liam looked out the window. "Because she let me go, and maybe I let her." His voice broke at the end. Josh was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know what I think? I think she let you go because she thought you'd come back only if it was real. Not a dare. Not a game. Just you." Those words followed him through the rest of the day. That night, unable to sleep, he opened the notebook Clara had given him. She'd left it on the table during their last quiet dinner, a leather-bound journal with blank pages. "Fill it with something true," she had said. At the time, he laughed and said he didn't write anymore. Now, he wasn't sure he could stop. He filled 6 pages before dawn, every sentence an apology he hadn't spoken, every paragraph a memory he hadn't dared revisit. He wrote about her laugh, the one she tried to hide behind wine glasses, about the way she touched her wrist when nervous, about how every room she entered suddenly became too quiet because she never wasted words. And then he wrote, "You let me go because you didn't want to keep someone who didn't choose you without a dare. But I'm here, choosing you without anyone watching. Tell me that's not enough." The next day, he didn't bring flowers or speeches. He brought the journal. He stood outside the glass tower where she worked, holding it like a truth he could no longer carry alone. The security guard raised an eyebrow but didn't stop him. Apparently, his face was known now, for better or worse. When he entered the executive floor, everything felt sharper, quieter, like the air itself had been holding its breath since he left. He didn't see her at first. He walked past her office, then paused. She was inside, standing near the window with her back turned, speaking to someone on the phone in clipped, precise tones. He waited until she hung up, then knocked once. She turned slowly. For a moment, her face didn't change. Then something in her eyes flickered surprise, maybe hope. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I wrote something," he said. "I needed you to read it. But if you'd rather I say it out loud, I will." She didn't move, so he opened the journal and started reading. His voice shook at first, then steadied. With each word, the silence between them cracked. He read about the first time he saw her smile and how it felt, like sunlight through storm clouds. He read about how she gave him space, then took his breath, how she made him feel like more than a dare. He read until his voice caught on the last line. "I'm not here to fix you. I'm just here to stay. If you'll let me." She didn't speak for a long time. She walked toward him slowly, took the journal from his hand, and held it against her chest like something sacred. "You left," she whispered. "You told me to. And you didn't fight me." "Because I didn't know if I was worth the fight." Her voice cracked then. "I've spent years making sure no one got close enough to hurt me, but you didn't ask for anything, and that scared me, more than anything else." He stepped closer. "You're not something I survived. You're someone I want to build with." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached up and touched his face. "You know this won't be easy. People will talk. They'll say I bought you, used you, controlled you." "Let them," he said, pressing his forehead to hers. "I'll be too busy loving you to care." They didn't kiss right away. They just stood there, forehead to forehead, breathing the same air like they had finally come home. Later that evening, they returned to the penthouse. No champagne, no speeches, just quiet music and warm lighting. She cooked. He set the table. When she burned the garlic, he didn't let her apologize. He just laughed and kissed her knuckles. When he spilled the wine, she didn't scold him. She just wiped the counter and kissed his cheek. That night, they didn't undress each other like strangers discovering a body. They held each other like two people discovering peace. And when the silence settled, it wasn't distance anymore. It was belonging. Days turned into weeks. The headlines faded. The board stopped questioning. Because Clara made it clear this wasn't a scandal. It was her choice, her life, her happiness. Liam didn't move into her world to be kept. He stayed to walk beside her, step for step. He started teaching part-time at a local college. She began carving out time from her empire to simply live. They made grocery lists. They forgot to fold laundry. They argued over which movie to watch and who left the bathroom light on. And they loved each other, not in grand declarations, but in daily truths. A hand on the small of the back, a coffee left beside the bed, a journal, now half filled, sitting between them every night. One afternoon, Clara stood in front of a class of young women at a mentorship seminar. When asked what power meant to her, she paused, glanced toward the back where Liam stood leaning against the doorway, then said, "For years, I thought power meant never needing anyone. Now I know it means choosing someone even when you don't have to, and being chosen back without condition." That night, Liam kissed her temple and whispered, "I'll keep choosing you, even when you burn the garlic." She laughed, not because it was funny, but because for the first time in her life, she believed him. The night it all changed didn't begin with fire or fury. It began with a single question. Liam had spent the afternoon helping Clara prepare for a benefit gala she was hosting at the Devon Foundation. It was supposed to be routine press, speeches, donors, and handshakes, but something had shifted between them. In the weeks since their reunion, love had taken root, not just in private moments, but in the way they moved around each other, as if their bodies had memorized a rhythm only they could hear. That evening, Clara stood in front of the mirror in a deep emerald gown, her hair pinned up, her shoulders bare. She didn't say anything when he entered the room, just looked at him in the reflection. His eyes met hers, steady and full. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I didn't take the dare?" he asked. Clara adjusted an earring, her expression unreadable. "I used to," she said softly. "Now I just thank the universe that you were foolish enough to say yes." She turned to face him. "Do you regret it?" He shook his head. "Only that I didn't see you sooner." They didn't leave for the gala right away. Instead, Liam stepped behind her, slid his hands over her waist, and kissed the back of her neck. She exhaled, a sound that was part sigh, part surrender. "We'll be late," she whispered. "Let them wait," he murmured against her skin. She turned to him, slowly, as if still unsure this moment was hers to keep. "Are you sure?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. He kissed her like it was the only thing he had ever meant to do, the kind of kiss that unlearned every rule and rewrote every wall she had ever built around herself. When they undressed, it wasn't a rush. It was reverent. His hands moved across her body like she was something rare, not because of her wealth or her name, but because no one had ever looked at her and seen anything but strength. With him, she was allowed to be soft, allowed to tremble, allowed to be afraid. He traced the curve of her spine, the scar near her hip, the edge of her collarbone like a map he'd been dying to memorize. She unbuttoned his shirt slowly, her fingers brushing skin she had only touched in sleep. When their bodies finally met, it wasn't fire, it was gravity. Quiet, inevitable, anchoring. She whispered his name like it was the only word that ever mattered, and he held her like he had finally come home. Afterward, they lay tangled in silence, her head on his chest, his hand in her hair. Neither of them spoke because there was nothing left to prove. But love, no matter how honest, doesn't keep the world away. At the gala, everything went as expected. Speeches were made, money changed hands, cameras flashed. But near the end of the night, a donor approached Clara with a knowing smile. "Congratulations," the woman said smoothly. "You've made quite a statement, Clara. A boy half your age. It's bold, risky, very you." Clara smiled politely. "And yet, here you are, still donating." "Of course," the woman replied. "But let's hope he doesn't ruin your legacy. Boys don't always know how to behave in a woman's world." Clara felt the sting behind the words, but said nothing. Later, she told Liam what had been said. He listened without anger, only a quiet resolve in his eyes. "I don't care what they think," he said. "Let them whisper. I'll speak louder." But the whisper grew into something else. One of Clara's competitors had leaked a photo of the two of them taken months ago, before the marriage was public. The media spun it like a scandal. Young escort turned husband, Billionaire Clara Devon's new toy boy. The headline was brutal. The subtext worse. Clara's board called an emergency meeting. Investors grew nervous, and just like that, the woman who had survived betrayal, divorce, and a lifetime of being underestimated was being told to reconsider her choices. She stood in the boardroom as men in suits debated her life like it was a marketing campaign. "Your position requires discipline," one said. "The optics are damaging." "You've built too much to risk it now," another warned. Clara said nothing for a long time. Then she stood. "Do you know what I risked when I married him?" she said calmly. "Not my image, my heart, and I would do it again." Liam heard about the meeting secondhand. He waited for her in the lobby, unsure if he'd still be hers by the time she came down, but when she saw him, her expression didn't break. She walked straight into his arms. "They want me to leave you," she said against his shoulder. "Then we'll leave them first," he said. That night, they sat in the living room of her penthouse, lights low, city buzzing beyond the glass. "If this costs you everything," he began. She cut him off. "Then it was never mine to begin with. But you are." The words weren't poetic, they were raw, honest, and Liam, who once walked into her life on a dare, now sat beside her, ready to face the world, not as a boy who had something to prove, but as a man who had something worth protecting. She leaned into him, pressing her forehead to his. "Promise me one thing," she whispered. "Whatever happens, you stay real. Don't become what they expect." "Only if you promise the same," he replied, "that you never shrink yourself to make them comfortable." They kissed again, not because of lust or fear, but because love had finally made its home in a place no one expected, and no headline could unwrite that. The fallout was quieter than expected. No scandals exploded. No cameras camped outside the penthouse. The headlines didn't scream, at least, not for long, but the silence that followed was heavier than noise. It was the kind of silence that lingered in conference rooms and board meetings, in hesitant glances and carefully worded memos. And in that silence, Clara Devon made a decision. She stepped away, not in resignation, not in defeat, but in defiance. The press called it a strategic sabbatical. Investors speculated. Insiders whispered about breakdowns, about impulsive love and reckless choices. But Clara didn't offer explanations. She just packed a single suitcase, closed the door to the empire she had built, and left. Liam watched her do it, not as the student who once stumbled into her world on a dare, but as the man who now walked beside her by choice. "Where do you want to go?" he asked as they stood on the tarmac beside a chartered flight that could have taken them anywhere. She looked up at the sky, her jaw set but her eyes tired. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere no one cares who I am." They flew north, a lake town with no signal, a small cabin with creaky floors and mismatched dishes. It didn't look like power. It looked like peace, and for a while, it was. They woke to birds instead of email notifications. She wore flannel shirts and baked things badly. He read aloud to her on the porch. They forgot what day it was. He cut firewood. She painted. They laughed more in those 2 weeks than they had in the last 2 months. But beneath it all, something still pulsed. A question neither dared voice. How long can this last? Because the world they left behind was waiting, and they both knew it. One evening, Liam came back from the town grocery run and found her on the dock, staring at the water. "It's not enough, is it?" she said, quietly, before he could speak. He set the bag down. "You mean this?" She nodded. "Us. This place. Hiding." He sat beside her. "It's not hiding. It's breathing, but it's also not forever." She looked at him then, eyes glassy with something deeper than fear. I'm not afraid of the world, Liam. I'm afraid of losing myself in it again. Afraid that when we go back, they'll strip everything soft out of me until I become her again. He took her hand. Then don't go back as her. Go back as you. She shook her head. I don't know who that is anymore. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I do. I've seen her. She's the woman who sits barefoot on a dock and says things she's never said out loud. She's the one who leaves the kitchen messy and doesn't apologize. The one who sleeps with her hand on my chest like she still can't believe I'm real. Clara looked away, blinking fast. She's also the woman who built something no one else could, he continued. And if she walks back into that tower with her head high and my hand in hers, then no one, no headline, no boardroom gets to rewrite her story. She exhaled. And if they make me choose again? He looked her in the eye. Then we build something new, together. A week later, they returned, but they didn't return the same. The elevator ride to the top of the Devon Tower felt different this time. Clara wore no makeup. Her hair was in a simple braid. Liam stood beside her in jeans and a button-up that hadn't seen an iron in days. No performance, no script. When the doors opened, staff paused. Some blinked. Others whispered, but no one spoke. Clara walked into the boardroom alone that morning. She placed a folder on the table and said, I'm restructuring the leadership model. Shared authority, diversified voices. I won't run this alone anymore, and I won't pretend I want to. Someone tried to interrupt. She didn't let them. I'm not stepping down, she continued. I'm stepping forward, with someone by my side. If that threatens you, there's the door. No one moved. When she walked out, Liam was waiting. How'd it go? He asked. I think I scared them, she replied. Good, he said. They needed it. They didn't go back to the penthouse that night. They went to the small apartment Liam used to share with 3 roommates, now vacant, dusty, and smelling faintly of student desperation. She sat on the edge of the bed, took off her shoes, and smiled. This place doesn't smell like success, she said. No, he agreed, but it smells like beginnings. She curled into him that night with her head on his chest and whispered, You changed everything. He kissed her hair. You let me. Weeks passed. The noise faded. People adjusted. The tabloids moved on. And slowly, a new narrative took root, not about a scandal or an age gap or a dare, but about a woman who chose love over image and a man who gave her the courage to be vulnerable without losing her strength. Clara returned to work, but not the same way. She delegated more. She took days off. She smiled in public, even when no camera was pointed at her. Liam started publishing essays about power, about identity, about loving someone who doesn't fit into the world's expectations. People read them, quoted them, invited him to speak. He declined most offers. He was too busy living. One morning, Clara found a note on the kitchen table, just one sentence. Meet me on the roof at sunset. She climbed the stairs slowly. When she opened the door, he was standing there, holding a small velvet box. Her heart stuttered. I know we're technically already married, he said. But that marriage started with a joke, a bet, a dare. He opened the box. Inside, a simple ring, not flashy, not expensive, just right. I want to do it again, he said. Not for paperwork, not for appearances, but for us, for real. Will you marry me again, this time with no headlines, no boardrooms, no doubts? She stepped forward, eyes wet. I thought you'd never ask. They didn't throw a big wedding. No press, no designer gowns, just a park, a few friends, and vows spoken like secrets finally made safe. He promised to see her even when she tried to disappear. She promised to stay soft, even when the world hardened around her, and when she whispered, I do. It wasn't a contract. It was a home. The wind danced gently through the trees as Clara and Liam stood barefoot on the grass, hand in hand, surrounded by no more than a dozen people who mattered. There were no camera flashes, no designer labels, no curated perfection. Just realness. Soft laughter, shared glances. A moment so intimate it belonged only to them. When the officiant asked if they had anything personal to say, Clara surprised herself by speaking first. She turned to Liam, her voice calm but trembling at the edges. "I've spent most of my life proving I didn't need anyone," she began. "That I was strong enough, sharp enough, alone enough. But then you walked into my world, young, bold, kind, and you didn't try to break down my walls. You waited until I opened them. You didn't ask me to change. You let me breathe. And somewhere in between that quiet patience and your terrible cooking, I fell, not fast, not loud, but deeply." Liam looked at her like he was seeing something sacred. Then he replied, voice steady, words simple. "You were never a dare to me, not even from the beginning. Maybe I didn't know it then, but something in me recognized you. Not the powerful version the world sees, but the woman who aches, who loves in silence, who wakes up scared some mornings but keeps showing up anyway. You gave me more than love. You gave me purpose. Not as a man trying to save you, but as the man you let stand beside you." They didn't kiss with passion. They kissed with peace, like two souls saying, "Finally." That evening, back at their shared home, Clara sat by the window while Liam made tea. She watched the steam curl through the air, the quiet warmth of something that didn't need to prove itself anymore. He handed her a mug, sat beside her, and leaned his head against hers. "I used to think love had to be fireworks," she said softly. "Explosive, obvious, but this quiet thing we have, it's stronger." He smiled, "Because it was built through choice." "No," she corrected, "because it was built through truth." Outside, the city buzzed. There would be other stories, louder ones, scandals, successes, downfalls. But this one, theirs, would never make headlines again. And that was exactly how they wanted it. Because love, real love, doesn't need a stage. It just needs two people willing to stay when everything else says run. Sometimes a dare leads to disaster, but sometimes it leads to everything you never knew your heart was strong enough to want.